Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I am joined by Dr. Myriam Hadnes. With a PhD in behavioral economics and a master's in sociology, Myriam combines academic knowledge with practical experience in group collaboration and facilitation. She is the host of the Workshops.work podcast, where she engages in weekly conversations with global facilitation experts. She has also built NeverDoneBefore, NDB, a global online community of facilitators who share a common goal: to spark fresh trends in group collaboration. With her business, workshops.work, Myriam follows the vision to create an ecosystem for facilitators, helping them to leverage the impact of their work through community, collaboration, and co-creation. And if you haven't gotten it through that bio, she is all about facilitating positive experiences for groups and for individuals. She is super passionate about it, super knowledgeable about it, as you will see. And right away, we jump into this conversation and she starts to create a ton of clarity around what it means to be a good facilitator and how listeners can start to implement this stuff in their lives, both in their personal lives and in their work lives. This is one, as I say, I kind of nerd out in this a little bit, as you'll hear. I'm going to go back to and study because facilitation is a leadership skill. And Myriam points that out. Leaders are there to facilitate the experiences that their team members are having in the workplace or in whatever group that you're leading. And really, leaders, especially at the top, CEOs and other executives, you're facilitating the mission and success of that company. That is your role. And so these types of skills and the sub-skills that go into facilitation really are critically important human and success skills. With that said, if you are interested in this topic or any of the other topics we talk about on this show, reach out to me through LinkedIn is a great way to do it, through the website, peoplebusinesspodcast.com. Love to engage in these conversations and love to also facilitate, speaking of facilitation, conversations between our guests and folks in the community who need their help. So I hope you enjoy it. Would love to continue the conversation in the real world, or at least in the virtual world. Here is Myriam Hadnes. Myriam, welcome to the show. As you and I have been geeking out in our prep for this, I've gotten more and more excited because, as I have explained to you and as I've explained on here plenty of times, I think that there is an art to hosting a dinner party. And you told me that there is actually a practice to that called facilitation. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Not just dinner parties, but the art of facilitation and what it means. So welcome to People Business.
Thank you, Brian. Excited to be here and to discuss about facilitation, hosting, what the difference is, and when it's maybe we can also over-facilitate a dinner party. So how to avoid that, the cringy feeling for our guests.
Well, you've already hit 3 of my questions. So let's start just at the beginning. Let's set the table, if we want to keep using that metaphor. What is facilitation and what is the difference between facilitation and hosting?
So facilitation is, I would say in a nutshell, the art of making things easy for usually a group of people. And it often refers to process facilitation. So how can we design a process and an experience that helps a group of people to go from confusion to clarity to action?
From confusion to clarity to action, the process that gets you from confusion to clarity to action. I like that. Sorry, I just had to say that again. I was like, I like that.
Yeah, it's the art to create an environment that feels safe enough where everyone can show up as they are and can grow larger than their parts. And I think I like to explain what facilitation is as opposed to consulting. A consultant usually owns the outcome or the output. That's what they are paid for. They crunch the data. Maybe they have group conversations. They consult with employees of a company. And at the end, they say, okay, this is what you should do. A facilitator owns the process and believes that the group owns the output. So the facilitator trusts that the group has all the knowledge and everything they need already, but they need someone to help them not to go off on tangents, not to only follow the loudest voice in the room, and not to stop at the easiest possible outcome, but maybe to peel off a few more layers from the onion.
I love this. And the clarity that you have in this is fantastic. I can already tell this is going to be one I'm going to have to go back and listen to again and take some notes on our conversation, because I geek out on all this stuff. And already there's a lot to process in terms of how we show up to any kind of meeting or engagement or project or anything. Like what is the mindset that we're going into? Are we there to solve? Are we there to help them solve? Do we have a process for bringing clarity and driving action? Or do we not even have our own clarity? Like, all of those things are great questions and mindsets to ask before we even walk into any encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, whom do we serve? Do we serve the client or do we serve the group? And I think
that's a great prep question before you walk in, especially like, I just think about my own work where you walk in and there's a hierarchy to the team that we're consulting with. And are we there to serve the company? Are we there to serve the executive? That is a great clarifying question.
And that often boils down to integrity, because I don't think that there is one correct answer to that. And very often it feels as, yes, we have to be loyal to the client because they are paying us. On the other hand, if they expect us then to put the group in a space that doesn't feel safe, or we call that facilitate the group. So to facilitate a process where the outcome has already been defined. So we're basically just manipulating the group so that they at the end come up with the idea that the CEO has decided anyway already.
We're going to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
So what are some of the skills that go into navigating that kind of a dynamic? Like, how do you maybe approach that leader or that dominant force in the room and start to artfully move the direction back to the group?
Yeah. I think it starts with the inner work, in the sense that how can you show up and have the courage to actually speak up towards the client and the group, and to have the group trust you to guide them through this process. So courage is one part. And at the same time, the humility. And I think that's really the dance, that on the one hand, you're leading from the back of the room, because in the best of all cases, the group will forget about you as a facilitator. And I think the best compliment to a facilitator is when the group at the end says, "Oh, that was so easy. Why did we hire this facilitator in the first place?"
Yeah.
Because this means that we have designed a process that make it so that stitches these micro conversations to each other in such a smooth way that it was crystal clear that they came to the conclusion.
Yeah.
I hadn't even realized.
That makes me think of the term coach. And I know, like, I can get a little bit stuck in like words matter and what's the definition of different words, but I think it's important. So like what you just described, I think of as what a coach does, right? Like, a coach doesn't have the answers, you have the answers, but the coach helps facilitate the process to get you to the answers. Do you think of those as similar, or is 100%. There a distinction?
Yes. So a coach and a facilitator very often use the same tools. We ask questions, we listen to what is not being said. We trust the capacity of answering the questions and finding the answers is in the group and the individual. For me, the big difference between a group coach and a facilitator is that in a coaching process, the goal is to look inward. And how do I function as an individual? What's my mindset? How do we work together as a group? Whereas a facilitator looks at something that's outside of the group. So what is the goal that we want to achieve together, and how can we get everyone to pitch in?
Well, and I like that last question, going back to what do you do with a dominant executive or leader? Asking those questions up front, I think, can be so important. I think we often go into collaboration assuming we're all on the same page. I lead sales for our organization and am growing my own book of business. And so I can't tell you how many processes I go through where we're pitching a client where the person who's running the process assumes that they have the autonomy to make the decision. I have 2 of these going on right now. And we get to the end and they say, great, we'd like to hire you. And then an executive comes in seemingly out of nowhere and says, well, hold on, you didn't make the decision I wanted you to make. What about this other thing? And they realize that they didn't actually have the autonomy they thought they had. And so I've got another one of these right now where I've coached the person who's going to go through a process to go back to their executive team and ask these questions to say, how are we going to make these decisions? Do you have a preferred outcome now that we can start working towards? Maybe they want to run a process, but let's just see ahead of time if you even have that capacity first. And so that sort of pre-work to get clearance, to get alignment and clarity can be so important to then going in and facilitating a good outcome.
100%. And it reminds me of, there's a similarity again to come back to the dinner parties. A great dinner party starts with a preparation and make sure whom you invite, why you invite them, and whom you don't invite. I think with many leaders, when they think, oh, we need a workshop for that, they think, oh, the workshop is the silver bullet to get all the answers. But then when you dig a little bit deeper of why they need the workshop, very often it's not clear. And I think a good facilitator has this coaching capacity to help the leader come clear why they need the session in the first place. And I think one of the superpowers of a good facilitator is to make the implicit explicit from the start. What is an assumption? Are we sure that everyone can subscribe to that? Is it an assumption or is it a fact? And how can we test this assumption? And what happens if we speak it out? For instance, what happens often is that a team leader thinks, oh, I see that my team members are not so engaged anymore, and maybe there's a little bit more sick leave or burnout. We need a team building workshop. And when you dig a little bit deeper and also speak to the team members, what comes out is actually, no, it's not a team building that they need. They need clarities on roles and responsibilities. Maybe they need someone to take a decision.
Yeah.
So clarifying the purpose of a workshop must be the very first step. And they are not shying away to really dig a little bit deeper and dare to tell the hiring client that maybe this is not what you need.
Yeah. It sounds like that pre-work is such an important step in a facilitator, where you're sort of starting as a coach to the team that is creating the group experience, and then going in and facilitating that experience for that team in the best way.
Yeah. Yeah. Starting as a coach and then becoming a designer, an experienced designer.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that too, because I have had conversations on here with people talking about the terms experience design and design thinking, and such an important skill set in solving any kind of problem or creating any kind of outcome for a group of people, right? Leading them through some kind of experience. Everything is an experience. The hiring process, the onboarding process, the work that you actually do, what you do every day is an experience. The vacation you go on, the dinner party you have, the interactions with your children, which we live in experiences, in an experiential world. And this skill set of experience design is so important. And what I hear you saying is pretty much an overlap in what I hear other people saying when it comes to experience design. You are guiding people through an experience in a facilitated way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it is part of the facilitation. So for instance, when you walk into a space and you see one microphone in the front of the room and then rows of chairs in front of it gives you one sensation of what will happen. It immediately sets your expectations. Okay, you're going to sit down, you're going to listen to someone speak, and there's only one person speaking at the time. If you walk into a space with chairs in a circle, maybe you think of therapy or Alcoholics Anonymous, or a workshop. And then there are all these things in between. So how do you have tables or not? How do you allocate the chairs? How large are the groups? And is there a table between the chairs? Do you have flip charts? What is the music? So all these small things set a tone and start to create an experience before anything has happened yet.
Yeah, well, and that plays into your comment earlier about if done well, people wonder why they even hired a facilitator at all. But so much of this, like you could just architect a room in a way that creates more collaboration versus the way that they might set up the room that actually stifles that type of brainstorming and creative work.
Yeah. And I think that's what design thinking brought to the business world, the creative rooms, that all the furniture has to be movable. Everything looks nice and has a slightly playful character. Then some organizations then forgot that it's not enough to just have the creative room.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to just have the design thinking process, because process is one thing. I think having a toolbox with activities of brainstorming, of World Cafe, of Fishbowl, or all these funky activities, that's one thing. But which activity to choose when, how to lead into it, and how to debrief it, this is, I think, where the interesting work then starts.
Yeah. So what are the misconceptions of facilitation? We've talked a little bit about what it is. Mm-hmm. What are the misconceptions and what is it not?
Oh, I love that question. I think the biggest misconception is that facilitation is done in a workshop room. And for me, capital F facilitation is done in a workshop room or in a meeting or in a change process, usually supported by a facilitator. But then there's all the small f facilitation that happens in everyday interactions. And I think the biggest misconception of facilitation is that something that only facilitators need to do. And I believe that it's actually a leadership skill, that if a manager does not have basic facilitation skills, they end up being a micromanager. And in order to step into leadership means empowering the group, means making it easy for their team to get the work done, means creating psychological safety for the team so that everyone can ask the questions that are crucial, can point out challenges as soon as they show up, can challenge the status quo. And all of these are leadership skills that are basically facilitation skills.
Yeah. Well, if you go back to your very first definition of moving a group from confusion to clarity to action, I mean, that's leadership. That is leadership, right? So I love your point of facilitation as a leadership skill. That was the thought in my head right before you said it. And so I love that's where you went to. Because any leader who is trying to create clarity and drive action needs to be paying attention to the different sub-skills that go into facilitation.
Yeah. And then I think the other misconception is that facilitation is woo-woo. We sit in a circle, talk about our feelings, sing Kumbaya. And that speaking about our feelings is something that is unprofessional, doesn't belong to the workplace. Because I think facilitation also helps to flatten the room, so to take out hierarchy, so that every idea matters and every voice matters. And I think if we are inviting individuals into a space to spend their time and their attention. These are their two most precious resources, because once they spend them, they will never get them back. So we are asking people to join a meeting or anything. If we are not interested in their voice and in their thoughts, why are we wasting their time in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Then send them an email, send them a video or a link to a YouTube. But don't invite them to a live meeting. It only makes sense if you're really interested in what they have to contribute. And hence, it's your responsibility to create a space where they can contribute and feel safe to contribute.
So what goes into creating that safe environment? And we've talked on here before about psychological safety. I did a whole episode on psychological safety, but just be curious from a facilitation standpoint, what are the key things that make people feel safe in a group space?
That the feeling that they can show up as their true selves and they can leave, and that they're valued, respected, appreciated for it, and that they have permission to contribute. I like Timothy Clark's model of the 4 stages of psychological safety, where he says that it is a function of permission and respect. And psychological safety increases linearly with an increase of permission and respect, which means permission to be there, to ask a question, to share your opinions, to be, and respect, feeling appreciated and appreciating others. So how can we increase permission and respect? Inviting someone to a meeting as a first thing. How do we know that someone respects us? Details. It's listening to what we are saying, asking a question, inviting us to reflect on something, maybe a smile.
Yeah.
Maybe a pause, maybe a nod. That's how we see that we are respected and appreciated. How do we feel that we have permission? Being invited to ask questions. Being invited to share our opinion. So I think these are small things that we can do with a big impact. And one that I would say is maybe the most difficult is authenticity. If I am walking into a space, and I see many facilitators, unfortunately, doing that, they start a workshop and then they have their kind of professional posture. Welcome to this workshop, and I am your facilitator, and this is what we'll do, and I will be very professional. And then suddenly, everyone has the impression that they have to be so professional and put on a mask. And I think it comes from an insecurity. So if I feel that I have to put on this professional mask and to play a game and to prove something, then it basically means that I'm judging myself. I'm not allowing myself to be my full self. So if I'm judging myself, I'm also judging others. So if I can be authentic in myself and just a little bit relaxed and say, hey, we're all humans. This is how we feel. We all have imposter. We all have stuff going on between our ears. We are all overworked. There are many of us maybe now who don't want to be here because you have other stuff to do and your emails are overflowing. That's okay.
Yeah. This is a question that I have, though, because I feel like there's a line. I feel like this is a range, and you can get outside this range and get into trouble still. Like, you can be too formal and get into trouble, but you can go the other way as well and be, I don't want to, like, you air quotes, like too authentic, but it's like, bring your whole self to work. It's like, you don't want my whole self. You want a good version of my authentic self. And I think this can be like, well, my authentic self is a little bit rough around the edges, or my authentic self might be a little mean, or might be a little lazy, or a bit of a slob. You know, like, where's the line between being relaxed and like showing up without taking a shower or combing your hair or like having your shirt tucked in? There's just, I don't know. Am I making sense? Like, I feel like there's a bottom threshold to this, just like there's a top threshold to this.
Yeah, and I think that the top threshold of being too formal starts earlier than the being too informal, as long as you know what you're talking about. So when I'm saying authentic, doesn't mean that I'm not on top of my game. I can be rigorous in the process and say, okay, it's not okay to break some of the rules or to behave in a certain manner. I'll be very strict on the timing. I understand that many of us don't want to be here, but if you're opening another tab or if you're distracted, then that's not okay. So I think we do sense, long story, short answer, I think it all boils down to, do we care and do we respect the people around us? Because I can be very authentic and my full self as long as I respect the people, their time, and the space and content we're interacting in, then I don't think that we can be too authentic.
Okay. I appreciate that rabbit hole, because I've had this conversation with some people at work before, and it's usually people who are behaving badly, who are like, well, this is who I am. This is my authentic self. And it's like, well, then maybe your authentic self needs some work.
Yes. Oh, I love that. So to come back to the model by Timothy Clark with respect and permission, these people are usually those who take a lot of permission. I have permission to be my full self. But as soon as you're stepping on other people's toes, either by the words you're using or by the smells you're producing, you are lacking respect.
Yeah.
And then you're not contributing to the psychological safety or to anything productive. So yes, you have permission to be yourself, but do respect the others. And respecting others can be very subtle measures and is dependent also on the culture within which we operate. And if I show up in a bikini and without makeup and without, I don't know, to a corporate
showering for a week,
to a corporate meeting, I don't show respect towards those who join that, even though this might be my authentic self.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a much clearer answer than the one that I was getting at. So I love that clarity of, be authentic, but be respectful of the atmosphere that you're walking into. And sure, maybe they're in suits and you can walk in a t-shirt and that's okay. And that is who you are and you can do it in a respectful way, but make sure that you've thought about the environment you're walking into and given it some purpose. All right. Well, thank you for indulging me in that one. Want to talk also about facilitators who are also a part of the group. I think a lot of the time we are doing things as a group and there's no formal facilitator in the group. Maybe it is just the leader of the team and it's a big team meeting. Is it possible to both facilitate and participate? What guidance do you have for people who want to have a voice in the meeting, but also want to be partly a facilitator of the meeting?
Love that question. Thank you. I think in everyday meetings, it might be possible to have someone who facilitates and participates. And still, if this is the leader, if this is the team leader or the manager, I think it's a very dangerous, slippery slope. Because as a facilitator, we want to make sure that we're flattening the room, we're giving voice to everyone. If we're attached to the outcome, if we have a strong opinion, then we are biased. How can we make sure that everyone speaks and that we get the uncomfortable voices in, especially if they're against what our own opinion? I think one biggest misconception in the corporate space when it comes to facilitation and management is that the manager or the owner of the meeting has to facilitate it. I think rather the opposite is true, because if you invite to a meeting, you want to really focus on the conversation. And maybe you want to be part of the conversation. And if you have to look at the time, manage time, make sure that everyone contributes and contribute yourself and have an opinion and make sure that you got all the answers to your questions. I think that's a lot.
Yeah.
And so there are beautiful processes. So for instance, in the holacracy method, holacracy is a very extreme way of self-organizing systems, organizations with flat hierarchies. And it's very nerdy. And
that's what we do here.
Yeah? Oh.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And what it does, because it is so nerdy, that it provides a process that any team can follow almost without a facilitator. Because it's very clear. Okay, first round, everyone says whatever they have to say. Cool. Then, do you have anything to object? Okay, object. What do you need? Do you need A, B, C? Okay, so how can we contribute to that? Has it been satisfied? And you can go through the most complex agenda in an almost self-facilitated way. And you always give the responsibility back to the person who's actually affected. Because what happens often in these meetings is someone starts complaining. And as soon as you ask them, so, okay, so what do you need? Do you just need to be heard? Do you need information, a decision? And suddenly it's like, just complaining is maybe not enough. And you don't need a facilitator for that. You need a process.
Got it. Do you have examples of teams that you've seen where the leader brings in a different facilitator? And like, what is that? Do you have a story maybe you could share about that? Or what would that look like?
And you mean for a everyday meeting or a...
You can take that however you want, but just if a leader wants to walk into a meeting and not be the facilitator,
yeah,
but they're the leader, they're the voice, everybody's looking to them. How have you helped those types of groups find a different facilitator? What does that look like?
What I would recommend, because bringing an external facilitator is costly. So it doesn't make sense to have an external facilitator on a regular basis. And what I would recommend is to agree on, so with the team, build the capacity of some fundamental facilitation skills. And what is the type of meeting we want to have? What is the real purpose and the expected outcome? And then rotate. And then each time another team member is taking on the facilitation. And I think it helps every team member then also to have a slightly different perspective on the team dynamics and what's happening. It helps them to listen just a little bit more and then maybe summarize or reflect on what is happening on a more meta level.
Yeah.
And it's suddenly a shared responsibility.
Yeah. It makes me think of, have you ever played the game Apples to Apples?
No.
Or Cards Against Humanity?
Mm-hmm.
You know that game? They're basically the same game, but one's a clean version and one is a dirty version.
Oops.
Yeah, well, I've played them both. So it just makes me think of that, where you have a group of people having an experience and one person at a time has to step out of that experience, doesn't get to contribute. They become the judge, right? And so they're presiding over the whole thing. They're facilitating the outcome of that round of the experience. That's kind of what I hear you talking about, but in a corporate setting of, hey, for this one, I know we all want to participate in all these meetings. For this one, Myriam, I need you to sort of step outside the experience and help us facilitate a good outcome. The next time we go in, O'Brien, you're going to do that. The next time, Sally, you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the image that I have in my head as you're explaining that.
Absolutely. And I think over time, the team will build a muscle where they then also can keep each other accountable during the meeting, because they know how it is and how someone goes on a tangent and suddenly the time is up, or how the team gets lost in minute details just because they need to avoid this one difficult conversation. And suddenly all these patterns become so visible, and then they can talk about that on a meta level.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's actually happening during these team meetings?
Yeah, I love that. The ability to then get everybody's input on what that collaboration looks like. Because everybody's had the chance to facilitate it. I think it's interesting too to think, whose opinions do we need in this meeting and whose facilitation or observation do we need in this meeting? Because if we need the leader's input in the meeting, then maybe we let somebody else help facilitate it.
Yeah. And if the leader is someone who often speaks the first and the loudest, and then everyone just agrees, it might make a lot of sense to have the leader facilitate, but then really be a facilitator and shut up.
Yeah. No opinions, just facilitation. That's probably the most impactful change you could make.
Yes. And I think that many leaders would actually be happy. I've encountered leaders who always felt the burden that they have to contribute. And usually, and I saw it firsthand while I was still working on a day job, I had a brilliant boss who could think on his feet perfectly. And he was so busy that he didn't have time to prepare any meeting. So when he would step into a meeting, he would then just start talking because he thought this is what people expected of him. And I could see from the body language and I could sense the energy of the room just draining because he didn't even realize that all he had to do was to say, okay, I would be curious to hear your opinion. Why don't you just go around and tell me what is your opinion, your perspective on today's topic, and just summarize at the end. Everyone would have been happy.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone would have appreciated that. Mostly him.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a shift of mindset. That's something
for sure
we need to embrace.
Yeah. And hard for a lot of leaders who are used to having the microphone a lot. As you're talking, I'm thinking about my own experience, and we're always meeting to prep for clients or prep for, new prospects, sales presentations, that kind of a thing. So there's a lot of application for this.
And actually there's research that shows that we would evaluate a conversation, the more pleasant, the more airtime we had. So the more we speak, the more we think. And we all know these conversations where afterwards we didn't get to talk at all. And afterwards this person said, "Oh, you're such a great conversation partner." I didn't say a word. So this is because that's what happens in our brains. And now the problem is with meetings that usually those who are most senior speak the most. So those who invite to meetings, they feel most comfortable, so they speak the most. So they evaluate the meetings. And, that was a good meeting.
Yep.
And everyone who's sitting there and not getting to talk, but just listening, they don't enjoy it and it drains their energy. But as soon as they get into a position where they're in upper management and host meetings, they forget about that.
Yeah, how quickly we forget. Want to come out of that rabbit hole a little bit and dive into another one, which is this concept, because we've been talking about facilitation as far as orchestrating the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that could probably be overdone as well. So how do we know as a facilitator when to orchestrate things versus when to allow spontaneity to happen? How should we think about those two concepts?
Oh, yeah. I think a lot it starts with purpose. If you know what the purpose is of a group coming together and what they try to solve together, then I think you can pretty well evaluate, is this conversation contributing to this purpose? Does it bring us closer or is it taking us away? And I think when we are not sure, because sometimes also the purpose shifts, then suddenly the group realize that actually what we really need to talk about is that. And what I would then do is ask, okay, I observe that we came together to discuss this, A. Now you're going on a tangent and discuss B. Is this really the discussion you want to have? Is this more important, or shall we come back to A? And then they decide. And I think this is then the moment to potentially also ditch the entire agenda that we've planned, which happens most of the time. And I think it's a mix between really listening to the content, but also observing how's the energy in the room. Because if a group gets to a topic that is really the one thing important for them to discuss, you can see it in the body language. People are sitting straight, leaning forward, really following the conversation. And if they're going on a tangent, people lean back, the energy is draining. You see
picking up their cell phones.
Yeah. And you can even sense it online.
Tell me more about that. Through written text, or you're saying like through a video call?
Through a video call.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see it in the body language through the video. Although I think on a online facilitation, there is maybe less space for spontaneity and emergence. Is it? I think online things happen much faster. So to have a large group conversation with more than 6 people in the same space is very difficult to have everyone leaning in, because you cannot really speak over each other and it's difficult to have the entire overview. So you really have to break it up more into small group conversations and then bringing it back together.
Yeah. Just a different skill set when it comes to facilitation. Yeah. Well, it goes back to your earlier point, right? It's being thoughtful to how that environment works.
Yes.
So the environment, video environment works differently than the podium with the rows of chairs. And it works differently than an environment where the chairs are all in one circle and everybody's facing each other. Like, all those environments are different. If you're stuck with a certain environment, you just have to play to the strengths of that environment.
Yes, absolutely. And so the strength of in-person is that everyone can exchange a glance with each other or turn quickly to their neighbor to just check whether what they're about to say is totally stupid or not. Right?
Yeah,
and we do.
I've done that plenty of times.
Right? We do this all the time because it's scary to speak into the group without knowing whether this is appropriate, whether you're the only one who thinks that. What we often forget is that online this is not possible. So we are asking groups to contribute, to ask questions or to state their opinions, and don't give them the chance to double check whether they're going to make a stupid move. So online we have to design for these moments where participants can literally turn to their neighbors. Take 4 minutes, go into breakout rooms, discuss whatever question comes to your mind, come back, and then we discuss. And the beauty of online, where especially if there's lots of hierarchy in a team, or if there's a heavy load of conflict, I prefer online setups more than in person, because you can break up the group into small groups, into pairs, to have a conversation that the other ones cannot listen into. So it's very intimate, and they're very close, and they can speak honestly to each other. Everyone has the same chance to end up speaking to everyone else. So it's very democratic. Everyone has the same chance to end up in a breakout room with the CEO.
Yeah.
And this really changes the dynamic, because it makes everyone just a little bit more human.
Yeah. I like that concept of just thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of the medium or the environment that you're in, and then playing to those.
Yeah. Part of the skill set.
Yeah. So I want to shift over and ask just a couple fun questions as we are coming to kind of the end of this here too.
Fun for me.
Well, hopefully it'll be fun for both of us. Is there anything before I do that we've missed that's like foundational to what it means to facilitate?
Surely there is.
Fair enough.
And that's okay. I was just wondering whether I had answered your very first question about the difference between hosting and facilitation.
I don't know that we ever actually did, but we had a great conversation. If you would like to answer that one now, go for it.
Maybe if someone in the audience was like, I was waiting for this answer. Maybe just 2 words. I think the facilitation really has a clear outcome in mind. So something tangible that has to be achieved at the end. And hosting is usually for the experience itself. So if you invite for the dinner party, you don't expect the group to walk out with an action item list.
Yeah.
And for hosting, we do use a lot of these facilitation skills. So how can we create the safe space? How can we make sure that everyone has permission and feels respected and interacts in a nice way? Make sure that we don't over-facilitate. So you don't want to, distribute sticky notes or have... So now you speak and you don't want to over-engineer the hosting. But otherwise, it's similar.
Yeah. Well, so much of what you've talked about, back to dinner parties, so much of what you've talked about relates even to that kind of a setting, right? Creating the safe space. Even I love the little tips that you were talking about earlier around what it means to create that safe space or make somebody feel comfortable. Like I've noticed if I host a dinner party, I have a lot of small groups of friends. And so if I'm going to host a dinner party with 10 people, I will often pull in groups where everybody only knows me or only knows maybe one other person in the group. And so there can be a little bit of uncomfortable feeling in the beginning. And what I find is like somebody will say, oh, I did this. They'll share just a little bit. And I find if I reinforce that sharing and almost reinforce and not one up it in the sense of being a one upper, storyteller. My story has to be better than yours, but almost like push the vulnerability a little bit further. Like, oh yes, that's so, I've totally had that experience where I felt sad watching a movie. In fact, I was bawling the other day when I watched this thing. Now that person feels very protected because the thing that they shared is not the most extreme thing that's been shared. And I find that then opens other people up to then relate and share back because now they know that they're going to feel safe sharing that kind of thing. So yes, just a smile or a nod, but also just reinforcing the thing the person says and sort of coming alongside them to share in whatever vulnerability they've just shared. That kind of thing creates a safe space. I have found
100
really, really well. And then you can go very quickly, you can go pretty deep in the conversation.
Yeah. And this you could do in a meeting and somehow we forget.
Yeah.
And as much as you don't expect your dinner guests to bring their own food, we invite everyone to a meeting and expect them to have prepared the meeting, but not the person who invites.
Yeah. So let's a little offshoot of that is small talk. And this is one of the things you and I chatted a little bit about when we were prepping for this. What are ways that we can have better conversations and get to deeper, more authentic topics faster?
Asking questions that we're actually curious about and asking follow-up questions. It was a podcast guest of mine who said that once and it's stuck with me and it's so true. If I only could remember his name. He said the most powerful question is the follow-up question.
Oh, I love that.
Because we often say that, don't ask for what are you doing in life? What's your work? Ask something more deeper or whatsoever. And I've experimented a lot with weird questions at dinner parties just to see, okay, so how... And friends of mine have made fun of me, like, Myriam, please don't facilitate your date. Or me going to a party, did you bring your sticky notes? So I encountered very awkward situations where I'm like, what's on your mind right now? And then some people looked at me like I was a freak. And I was like, oh, really speaking their truth and kicking off a fantastic conversation. But you never know. Anyway, the point that I want to make, even if you ask someone, so what do you work? And they give you some sort of an answer, ask a follow-up question. Oh, how does it feel to be an accountant? For how long? Is this what you wanted to do when you were a kid? And you started with a quite normal conversation, and then ask a question that you're really curious about. I think most people just don't ask questions, or interesting questions, or questions that they care about.
Yeah. So the image that comes into my head is drilling. And we often think of it like we want to take an elevator down to a deep level of conversation quickly, but that's not how conversations work. You have to drill down to get there. Yeah. And that's where the questions come in, right? There are all these surface level questions that you start with. And to your point, like some people, you can start with a deeper level question, just take the elevator all the way down. But for most people, you're going to start with their comfort level, especially a new person or a group of people. You're going to start at the surface level every time. But it's how many follow-up questions and what type of follow-up questions that allow you to drill down deeper into that deeper level.
Yeah. And I believe that everyone loves to talk about themselves, as long as they have the impression that they're listened to and we're interested. Mm-hmm. And I think listening to just understand or appreciate, and not listening to reply, just to have this spaciousness around a conversation. And I think if you just pause for a second after someone has replied, to give the answer just a little bit of depth and space. Like if you have a beautiful painting, you put it on the wall, you want some space around it. If you honor the answer of the person you're talking to, even if it's just small talk, with a small pause, and then ask a follow-up question, you will have such a connection and leave an impact with this person, because we are not used to be listened to, and we are not used to be interested in by just a stranger. Yeah.
Well, I heard this advice the other day. I've not tried it yet, but it sounds brilliant. Is we often get stuck, like if we're at a party or something, we can get stuck in a conversation we want to get out of. And there's always the awkward, like, hey, I got to go to the bathroom, or I'm just going to wait till there's a pause, then I'm going to slink away. Yeah. And what this person had said was, you can say, hey, I have to go do this other thing, but before I go, and then ask one more question about what you were just talking about. So before I go, I was just curious, what is it like being an accountant? And that shows the person that you did care about the conversation and you were paying attention. It creates that second level conversation, or that second level questioning and deeper answer. And then you've already given yourself the out at the end of that question. And so I thought that was brilliant.
And I would be very curious whether you actually do need that out afterwards.
Yeah, maybe you stay in for a couple more. I have done that plenty of times without realizing it, but usually it's where I do have to go. I'm like, oh, I have to go home, and my wife's been with the kids and I'm supposed to be home at a certain time. But hey, something you said is really interesting. And I just have to stop myself from asking third and fourth level questions, because I am actually interested.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's difficult to really embrace or to live up to it. But I do believe that every person has an interesting edge. And it's then how willing are we to try to get there, and how curious are we about the other person? And I think asking about, if we find one thing that the other person is passionate about, as soon as they get this kind of spark in the eye, you can have a very pleasant conversation, or at least make another person very, very happy.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like we're all weirdos. And if you don't know what kind of weirdo somebody else is, you don't know them that well.
I like that.
It's like a good litmus test.
Yeah.
Like,
maybe don't start with this question. So what kind of weirdo are you?
Yeah. Oh, I would see. That's a question I would start with.
Yeah.
I would. I'm the kind of person who would start with that question.
I know that.
Hey, assuming we're all weirdos, what kind of weirdo are you? Yeah.
And then if you're asking this question, I hope that you can really hold the space without judgment for whatever answer comes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Second to last question here. You created a community never done before, which is for facilitators to try new things and experiment. Just curious if you could share like one or two things that have kind of blown your mind that have come out of that community recently. If the whole thing is to generate new ideas and innovative ideas, I'm just curious, like what's blowing your mind or really got your interest lately out of that community?
So 2 workshop experiences come to my mind. One was hosted by Dov Zal, and it was his curiosity was, can we collaborate and come to alignment without speaking a word? So can we have 90 minutes in total silence? And what do we have to do in order to facilitate that? So that was really interesting. We had a workshop by Grace Lau that she called the Tower of Babel, where what happens if everyone speaks their mother tongue? How much can we understand each other, even if we don't understand the words? And I brought that to an extreme where I was curious, okay, what if we don't hear each other? Because we've all been in these online workshops where like, you're on mute, and then we have to unmute ourselves. And I was like, what if we put them in a situation where like, oh no, you're not on mute, you're not on mute. So how much can we understand each other if we don't hear? So I invited participants to be on mute during a conversation in a groups of 3 and to speak about a topic that they want to make sure that they are on mute because they don't want others to hear that. So I invited them to talk about sexuality while being on mute. And and I had underestimated the impact, was it created such a strong bond between these 3 people that even after, for the debrief, they came off mute, that they talked very openly about whatever was going on, even about the sexuality. So even beyond the meta level of the experience.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to the fact of being witnessed as you process very vulnerable experiences or thought.
Because all they could see was the emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
would be powerful. Interesting. All right. Well, I'm glad I asked the question. And my last question, Myriam, is where can people find you and your work and engage with you if they need some help in these areas or want to learn more?
LinkedIn is the easiest.
Okay. Well, there you go. And we will link to your LinkedIn account in the show notes of the episode. Myriam, anything else you want to say before we go? This has been a fabulous conversation. And as I prefaced in the beginning, I definitely want to go back and take some notes on this. I'm a weirdo for all of this stuff. And just, I feel like once you start to see this stuff in the world, you can't unsee it. And you start to realize how much impact you can have on the experiences that you and others are having. And for me, at least, I want more of it. So thank you for coming on. Anything else you want to share?
Just some gratitude for you holding space for this conversation, for your curiosity, for the safe space you created, and for the intriguing questions. Thank you.
Well, likewise. Thank you for what you're doing and for taking the time and the energy. As you said, time and attention is what you can't get back. So we appreciate you spending some of yours here with us. And to everybody who is out there, hope this is helpful for you. There's a ton in here that we can all take away and start to implement right away in our meetings and in our homes. Lord knows I'm going to take a bunch of notes and do a bunch of writing on this and find ways to implement it. So best of luck to everybody out there.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.